Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked room today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret?
19 Great Hanover Street by Lillie Harris. This story is sponsored kindly by Ed Winter. My name is Alan Forsyth, my age 33. I stand 6 feet 1 inch and a half in my stockinged feet. I am sound in wind and limb. I have splendid digestion, have not a grain of superstition in my nature, am a doctor by profession and a bachelor because I see too much of the so-called joys of domestic life. Domestic life, indeed, my experience of that, gleaned from observations made while attending houses professionally, is that it is a snare and a delusion. But it is not my purpose to speak on that subject. My task is to write out faithfully the extraordinary events that befell me while I occupied the house 19 Great Hanover Street. Events that caused my hair to turn grey with horror in one single night. Events that have seared themselves on my brain. Events which can never be effaced from my memory while this life lasts. I say that I am strong and healthy because my narrative will sound like the delusions of some overwrought brain. And yet I have always had the reputation of being a clear-headed, eminently practical man. I am not superstitious, but stay, I ought to say I was not. For I have been taught that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy. In writing this history of facts, I can offer no explanation of their extraordinary character. I shall give you the whole story of what occurred to me, and if you like to disbelieve it, go yourself and spend a month or two in that accursed house, and you will be convinced. But let the time of your tenancy be in December, and if you live through the horror of what you will hear and what you will see, you will be fortunate. But assuredly, never, never will you laugh or jeer at the incomprehensible again. If, however, you take my advice, you will shun Great Hanover Street, or at least number 19. In 1884, I wished to commence practice for myself. I had been assistant to Dr. and I dare say should have kept with him, but an old aunt of mine died and left me some money. So I thought that I could not do better than utilize it by making a start on my own behalf. I advertised, and in due time I bought a practice, my predecessor selling it because of the ill health of his wife, which compelled them to live in Cheltenham. Unfortunately, I could not take their house, as they had it on a lease which was just up, and the landlord himself intended residing in it in future. Now, I had always had a house of my own, as when my poor mother died, I had kept on the home, and Anne, my housekeeper, who had originally been my nurse and so consequently petted and tyrannized over me in the manner of old servants, kept it in a way which was alike the delight and envy of all my bachelor friends. Of course, moving was a nuisance, but Slowminster was only about 70 miles from London, where I was then living, and I knew that if I could get a suitable house, Anne would speedily get it into comfortable order. "Don't worry yourself," said Mrs. Price, the wife of the doctor whose practice I had bought. "You'll soon get a house. Until then, make this your home, if you don't mind us being in a state of confusion with packing, etc." I thanked her, but still I resolved to get a house as soon as possible. I put myself in the hands of an agent, and for 2 days spent the best part of my time inspecting residences, all more or less unsuitable. At length I got thoroughly wearied. I walked along mechanically, and somehow I found myself in a street that I had never been in before. It was an old-fashioned looking road, with quaint red brick houses on either side. I looked up to see the name of the place. There it was, on the corner, Great Hanover Street. As my eye rested on the name, it also rested on a house. It was empty, and in the window was a card, "To let." I crossed over. It was a corner house, well on to the pavement, but round the corner was a large square garden, and through the high iron railings mounted on a brick wall I could see a side door. The very house for me, I thought triumphantly. A quiet, respectable neighbourhood. The door at the side would do excellent for the surgery. There's a nice garden. I think I'll look over it. The to let card informed me that the keys and full particulars were to be obtained at Mr. Hunt's, Howard Row. So I took out my pocketbook and jotted down the address, and then looked at the number of the house. It was 19 Great Hanover Street. As I strode along, I saw a hansom and hailed it, and was soon bowling off to Howard Row. Mr. Hunt, I found from the brass plate on the door, was a land agent, and this was his office. On entering, I saw that there were some half a dozen young fellows all busily engaged in writing. One of them got off his stool at my entrance. "I've come for some particulars concerning a house," I said. "Yes, sir," he answered, courteously but indifferently. The office was very quiet. The pens of the 5 clerks went scratching over the paper, and I was conscious of a vague and insane desire that they would lift up their heads and not be so aggravatingly industrious. "What house is it?" 19 Great Hanover Street, I answered. There was a dead pause. My wish was gratified. The clerks had left off writing, and with one common accord had turned round to stare at me. 19 Great Hanover Street, I repeated impatiently. The young fellow gazed at me, all indifference gone. He seemed amazed. "I think," he commenced in a quick, eager voice, strangely at variance with his former languid tone, when he was interrupted by the entrance of a small, brisk-looking gentleman, who I rightly imagined was Mr. Hunt. "What can we do for you, sir?" he asked. "I want some information about the house, 19 Great Hanover Street," I replied. Was it my fancy, or did the ruddy colour fade from his cheek? Anyhow, he stared at me with the same blank look that I'd noticed with the clerk. "Certainly," he responded, recovering himself with an effort. "I take it you are a stranger to the town?" "Yes," I answered. "I'm Dr. Forsyth. I've bought Dr. Price's practice." "Ah, yes," he said, eyeing me curiously. "So you would like particulars about number 19. It has been empty a long time, I might say a very long time, but the owners will be glad to do it up thoroughly for a good tenant." And then he gave me particulars as to accommodation, rent, etc. The finish of it was that Hunt and I drove to see the house, but I was conscious that our departure in the hansom was watched with much interest by the clerks. I was delighted with the house. The rooms were large and airy, the domestic arrangements splendid. On either side of the passage leading to the garden door was a good-sized room, which would do capitally for surgery and consulting room. In short, it was a small mansion, and the only thing that surprised me was the ridiculously low rent, which Mr. Hunt informed me was owing to the house being empty for so long. Another thing that astonished me was the man's nervousness, for he was certainly the most nervous beggar I ever met. Once I let my stick fall on the tessellated hall, and when he heard the clatter, he simply turned livid. To cut the matter short, I took the house for 3 years, on the understanding that it was to be repapered, whitewashed, and painted inside and out. I was staying at the Prices, but they were both in Cheltenham, making final arrangements for their removal there. And I heard nothing about my house till nearly a fortnight after I'd taken it. The work was being pushed on rapidly, but I'd been so extremely busy professionally that I'd only been down at number 19 twice, and I had been much tickled to see what an object of interest I was to all the neighbours, who eyed me from their windows with great curiosity. The Prices returned in the evening, and at dinner I said to Mrs. Price, "I've got a house, and hope to be able to move in next week." "I'm awfully glad to hear that you're suited at last," she replied cordially. "Where is it?" 19 Great Hanover Street, I answered. There was a pause, and a smash. A glass that she held in her hand fell to the ground. "Oh, doctor, not that red brick corner house," she said. "Not the one with the corner garden." "Yes, that's the one," I laughed rather impatiently. "What's the matter with it? Is it haunted?" "Yes," she answered. "Don't take it. I can't tell you how or why it is haunted. but it is. 2 people only have lived in it during the last 10 years, and one was found dead on the morning of the 22nd December, and the other, 4 years ago on the same date, was found raving mad, and died a fortnight after, without recovering his reason once to say what he had seen or heard in that fearful house. I burst out laughing, and my merriment only ceased when I saw how thoroughly offended my hostess looked. I beg your pardon, I said contritely, but I really cannot help feeling amused. Imagine anyone in this prosaic, materialistic age believing in ghosts. It's too funny. Why, I shall perfectly revel in number 19. I've been pining all my life to live in a haunted house, to see a white-robed female carrying her head under her arm, and so on. Mrs. Price looked offended. Her husband changed the conversation, and the subject dropped. But directly after she left the room, he said to me quite gravely, "Look here, Forsyth, don't live in that house. Sneer at it as much as you please, but there is something uncanny about it. My wife mentioned 2 cases, but there are 5 authenticated cases of people who have resided at number 19, and they have either been found dead or raving mad. No one knows what they have seen or heard, but the fact remains that strong, robust men of admirable physique have had their hair whitened and their reason destroyed with some unknown horror, and I beg of you not to rush into this mysterious danger." The doctor's warning had no effect on me. I was an out-and-out skeptic, and the idea of a haunted house implicitly believed in this 19th century of ours filled me with delight. The next morning I went down to see Hunt. "So, number 19's haunted," I remarked. He turned ghastly. "Well, yes, doctor," he replied, recovering himself with an effort. "It has that reputation, and it's given us a lot of trouble. You know what it is, give a dog a bad name, etc. And as it has got about that the place is haunted, folks are chary of taking it." "Is it true," I asked, "that everyone who has lived there has either died or gone mad?" He hesitated and fidgeted so that I was quite convinced that Price's story was correct. But rash fool that I was, nothing would warn me. "To tell the truth, doctor," said Hunt in a burst of confidence, "the house has got a bad reputation. It was a splendid property till about 20 years ago. A doctor occupied it then. He was a foreigner, Dr. Caravini by name, and he had a very lovely young wife who disappeared mysteriously. It was believed that she had eloped, but anyway, she disappeared just before Christmas. Her husband, always a grave and reserved man, said nothing, and offered no explanation, and the following December he was found dead. I was only a young fellow at the time, and I disliked the man most cordially for some unknown reason, but I shall never forget the awful expression of horror there was on his face when I saw him dead." "What day in December did he die?" I asked curiously. "He was found dead on the morning of the 22nd of December, and since then no one has passed a Christmas in the house," was the answer. For a moment my heart beat faster, and I was stirred by a feeling of dread. Then my common sense got the mastery of the idle superstition, and I said, "Well, I intend taking up my abode at number 19, and shall certainly give any ghosts who feel inclined to play hanky-panky tricks with me a warm welcome." "I can assure you, doctor," cried the little house agent seriously, "that if you show the people that these stories are mere nonsense, you will be doing a public service." After I left Hunt and went on my professional round, I found that I was looked upon as quite a hero, and a very imprudent one too. At nearly every house I was asked if it were true that I had taken number 19 Great Hanover Street, and when I replied in the affirmative, I had a repetition of the solemn warning given me by the Prices. It amused me intensely. How the house was haunted, whether by sounds or spectres, none could tell me. All they did was to shake their heads and repeat the stories of the deaths that had taken place there. I ventured to remark that it might only be a coincidence, people dying there on the one date, but my remark was treated with derisive sniffs. The time passed quickly, the house was finished, and as no expense had been spared over it, it looked splendid. So bright and cheerful, the sun gaily streamed into all the rooms, birds sang in the garden. In short, as I surveyed the place, I thought what an idiot I should have been to have let any superstitious nonsense stand in my way of renting such a suitable residence. Anne had arrived with all my goods and chattels. The only thing that annoyed me was that not a Slowminster girl would accept service in the house. It was an easy place. I offered high wages, but nothing would induce a local girl to come. They all said the same thing. I'd come in the daytime, but I wouldn't sleep in number 19 for wealth untold. Fortunately for me, Anne was an eminently practical woman. I had told her of the reputation that the house had, and she laughed with me at the idea of some people believing in such rubbish. So when she found that Slowminster servants wouldn't come, she wrote to 2 of her cousins who wanted situations and engaged them. And when they came, they were as much amused as she and I were at the idea of ghosts. Soon the house was put to rights, and it was the admiration of all my friends who called to see me. The plate-glass windows were veiled with the daintiest of lace curtains. Flowers were scattered about. The street door, which stood hospitably open, showed a wide, tessellated marble hall, littered with skin rugs and furnished in carved oak. Altogether, it needed but one thing only, and that was a lady to preside over it and share it with me. My patients used the side door in the garden, and a red lamp was conspicuously placed over the gate with the word surgery on it. As time passed on, I was more and more charmed with the house. The most timid person could not have detected even a suspicious sound. The wind never howled or moaned in the chimneys in an objectionable manner. Doors never opened ghostily. In short, it was as quiet and as well regulated as a house could possibly be. My practice was growing apace. I had been fortunate enough to perform a couple of very intricate operations successfully, and it had got my name well up with the local medical men. My consulting hours at home were from 9 to 10 in the morning, 2 to 3 in the afternoon, and 6:30 to 8:30 in the evening. During the latter 2 hours I was generally kept very busy. Sometimes I used to go out for a stroll after 8:30. But if I were tired, I stayed in my consulting room and had a quiet rest and read. I liked this room very much. It was large, had a southerly aspect, and the outlook in the garden was exceedingly pleasant. My lady friends declared that it was the snuggest as well as the best furnished room in the house. It had an oak suite upholstered in crimson leather, and I had as well several very large and delightfully cosy easy chairs scattered about. Heavy velvet curtains draped the door, and successfully shut out all draughts. One side of the wall was lined with bookshelves, filled with the works of my favourite authors, as well as the various scientific books needed in my profession. In the alcoves by the handsome black marble fireplace were carved oak cabinets, in which I blush to confess was a small but choice collection of wines, spirits, and cigars, comforts very dear to the heart of man. A long bay window looked, as I have said before, into the garden, and altogether it was the most comfortable room. Things went on very happily and smoothly, and I constantly congratulated myself on my wisdom in not allowing superstition to have any influence over me. The winter of 1884 was an unusually severe one in Slowminster, and I was kept exceedingly busy. So much so that I had to decline all invitations for social enjoyments, and was seriously thinking of the advisability of taking a partner. It wanted but a few days to Christmas. A patient of mine was dangerously ill, and I went to see her at night about 10 o'clock. When I returned home, I let myself in with my latchkey, for it was one of the strict domestic rules that was rigidly adhered to, that the servants, including Anne, went to bed punctually at 10. I strolled into my consulting room, kicked off my boots, lit a cigar, and sat down to have a good long read and rest, for I rarely, if ever, retired till the small hours of morning. Nip, my fox terrier, a purebred dog, and my constant and most faithful companion, lay at my feet. I suppose that I must have dozed off, for suddenly I was awakened by the book dropping from my hand, and at that moment came a howl of terror from the dog. "Nip, old boy," I said, "it's all right." But to my astonishment, I saw that he was standing upright, his head positively bristling with fear, his ears thrown back, and every now and again he emitted the most blood-curdling howls. I looked round. There was absolutely nothing to see to account for the dog's terror. I went to my desk, took a revolver from my drawer, and called Nip to follow me, but he could only stand shaking, an abject object of fear. I picked him up in my arms and went into the passage. There his howls were fearful, and his eyes seemed starting out of their sockets, but still there was nothing to see. When I got to the front portion of the house, he was quiet. I looked into all the rooms. Everything was in its normal state, so I calmly went to bed, taking Nip up with me as usual. As I turned in, I looked at my watch, nearly 1:30. I slept splendidly and came down to breakfast with a flourishing appetite. Just as I was finishing my bacon, Anne came in. "Morning, sir," she said. "How are you?" "All right, thanks," I answered. "How is your patient?" she asked. I stared at Anne curiously, faithful servant that she was. She had never hitherto displayed any such interest in my patients. "Out of danger," I replied, "and I hope we'll pull through all right now." "Must have been a frightful case," she went on. Well, acute pleuropneumonia is always rather dangerous," I answered impatiently. "Pleuropneumonia," echoed the woman. "I don't mean that. I mean the fearful accident that was brought in last night. I wish, Mr. Allen, you'd rung me up, as I might have been of some assistance." "Accident?" I repeated blankly. "What accident?" "Last night, sir," she answered. There was no accident I know of last night," I declared emphatically, "and I was in the consulting room till 1:30. "No accident?" gasped Anne, and I saw that she was ghastly white and was trembling so that she had to hold on to the table for support. "Sir, there must have been, for both the surgery passage and consulting room were swimming with blood this morning." "Nonsense," I cried. "You've had a nightmare." "I tell you, sir, it's a fact," she said. "When Jane went to clean the side door step this morning, she came back saying that there must have been a bad accident last night, for the place was covered with blood. She had turned so faint that I went myself, and from the door right along the passage into the consulting room, there it was. Oh, a horrible, horrible sight." "Is it all cleaned up yet?" I asked. "Not quite," answered Anne. I left my breakfast, and as I strode along, I nearly fell over Jane, who on her knees was busily engaged wiping up blood. Yes, I saw it myself. From the garden door a horrible red rivulet ran, and here and there the wall was splashed as if someone had wantonly dabbled in and thrown up the liquid. Sick and dizzy, I went into the consulting room. There was a scarlet trail right along, and just by the fireplace, there was a large, hideous pool of blood soaking into the carpet and leaving ghastly stains around. I'm not ashamed to confess that my brain reeled. The mysterious horror overcame me, and for a moment I thought that I was going to disgrace myself by fainting. Then common sense asserted itself, and I recovered. "Someone has been playing a scandalous practical joke here," I said sternly, "and you may be sure that I shall spare no expense to bring the perpetrator to justice." The servants looked but half convinced, and I even heard Anne mutter something about a haunted house. Although I affected to treat the matter lightly, yet I was sorely perplexed. I was quite convinced that it was a practical joke, but I was puzzled as to how the perpetrator or perpetrators could have got into the house. Then where did they get the blood from? And how silent must they have been? Suddenly I remembered Nip's terror, and a cold thrill went through me. Altogether, I was not surprised when my patients told me how very ill I looked. Mind, I had not the slightest belief in any supernatural agency. No thoughts of ghosts oppressed me. But I felt uncomfortable, as I could advance no reasonable theory to account for those ghastly marks. When I got home for luncheon, everything was as neat and trim as usual, excepting that my servants looked ill, and that a large skin rug had been placed over the stains on the carpet in the consulting room. The marks from the wall had also been washed away. But I felt strangely upset and irritable, and my annoyance was culminated when I was told that Nip was dead. I had left him in my bedroom, and when the girls had gone in, they had found the poor beast dead. I was so thoroughly dispirited that when a friend of mine wired to me and asked me to dine with him that evening, I gladly accepted the invitation as a means of ridding myself from my unpleasant thoughts. It was a lovely night, clear, cold, and frosty. The moon was lighting up the star-spangled blue sky. The air was deliciously bracing and exhilarating, and as I walked along, all my worries seemed to disappear. I spent a most enjoyable evening, and I wish you to bear in mind that the conversation never once touched upon the supernatural. I am an extremely abstemious man, and I drank only 1 glass of claret and 2 glasses of champagne. You will soon understand why I am giving you these apparently unimportant details. About 11:30 I said goodbye, and as I slipped into my fur-lined coat, my friend said laughingly, "What a big fellow you are, Forsyth." I glanced idly into the mirror and thought how well I looked. The gash shone on my diamond studs, and my curly hair was as dark brown as it could possibly be without being actually black. The next time I saw my reflection in a glass, it was the colour it is now, grey, bleached with horror. I walked home, whistling blithely, and just as I neared my house, I took out my bunch of keys preparatory to letting myself in through the surgery door. How bitterly cold it was. I had a feeling of pity for any unfortunate tramp that might be out. The wind had risen, and its icy blast penetrated even through my thick coat. When I got to the garden gate, judge of my astonishment when I saw crouching by the wall the figure of a woman. She rose when she heard my footsteps. I noticed that she wore a long black cloak and a black hood covered her head. She advanced to meet me, and the grace of her movement struck me with admiration. "For the love of God," she said in a low melodious voice, "will you help me?" I put my hand into my pocket mechanically and drew out £0.50, which I handed to her. She looked at it idly. "I don't want money," she said sadly. "It is of no use to me. I want shelter, for I am so cold." "What do you require?" I queried impatiently. "I'll give you another £0.50, and for 5 shillings you can get a bed anywhere." She put out her hands and laid them on my arm. How small and white they were. What an exquisite shape, the pretty rosy filbert nails, the slender tapering fingers on which blazed some costly diamond rings. At their touch a thrill went through me. "I am so cold," she repeated with infinite pathos. "Take me in with you and give me shelter." "You must be mad to ask me such a thing," I said angrily. "Go to an hotel." "They will be all shut," she replied, "and I am so cold that I shall die." As she spoke, the moon came out from a bank of cloud and lit up the unknown's face with a soft golden glory. Good heavens, what a face! Never could I have conceived of anything earthly so lovely. Even now, waking and sleeping, I can see it before me. It was a purely oval face with a delicate creamy complexion, absolutely colourless. The mouth was small and scarlet, and the lips were tremulous and pouting like a child's. I felt a mad desire to kiss them into smiling content. The nose was perfect, but the eyes were the chief beauty. Large, liquid, violet eyes, shaded with long black lashes, eyes that in their dreamy sensuousness were sufficient to make a man lose his soul. but for one glance of love from them. Rings of soft yellow curly hair escaped from the hood and clustered over the low white brow. I stood fascinated and gazed upon this dream of female loveliness. "Don't be vexed with me," she urged piteously, "but he has turned me out tonight in this bitter cold, and I shall die if you will not give me shelter." She came still nearer to me. Her cloak touched me. I felt her warm, fragrant breath on my cheek. Her hands tightened on my arm, and I am only a man. The blood was coursing through my veins, and I was losing my head under the glamour of those wonderful eyes. "Come in," I said hastily. "I'll give you shelter for tonight. It would kill a wee frail thing like you to be exposed to the cold much longer." She laughed gratefully, a low, rippling laugh like the tinkle of bells. "You are good," she murmured. She followed me up the path. I opened the door, and as she came in, I was vaguely struck by an impression that she knew her way about the house. I took her into the consulting room. A bright fire was crackling in the grate, and she went to it at once. "I am so cold," she said again, and she held out her white hands to the blaze. I turned up the gas. My brain was on fire. This was an adventure with a vengeance. But what would become of my reputation if it were to be known that a strange and lovely young woman had passed the night under my bachelor roof? As I looked at her, all my selfish doubts vanished. Laugh, sneer, if you like, but I, Alan Forsyth, was madly in love with a woman whose very name I did not know, and whose acquaintance I had made not a quarter of an hour back. She had loosened her cloak and stood in the bravery of her finery. She wore a gown of pale pink silk made in a style that I had never seen before. The bodice was cut low in front and showed a bosom perfectly modelled and as spotlessly white as marble. Amongst the laces that fell and rose with every breath was a cluster of half-blown roses, and their faint, sweet perfume seemed to madden me. They were fastened by a diamond brooch. The beautiful arms were bare to the shoulder, but diamond bracelets were clasped about them. Round the slender throat was a tight band of broad black watered ribbon, in the centre of which flashed a superb brooch of brilliants. This made the milky whiteness of the skin more vivid in contrast to the black. Her golden hair was piled up high on the queenly little head, and the coils were fastened by diamond pins. How perfectly lovely she was! I rubbed my eyes to see if it were a dream, and if the vision would fade away. But no, she was still there, with the flames flickering on her marvellous beauty. Where had she come from? Who was she? I knew everyone in Slowminster, by sight at least, and it was not likely that such a lovely creature could live in the town without being known. Besides, her dress and jewels showed that she was wealthy. "Are you warmer yet?" I asked, smiling. "No, I am so cold," she repeated wearily. "Do you think I will ever be warm again?" I curbed the inclination to take the slender form in my arms and warm it with the fervour of my embraces. I put some brandy on the table and mixed a little with water, which I handed to her. She took it with a grateful smile and sipped it, and I was relieved to see a tinge of pink come into the colourless cheeks. "You must tell me who you are," I remarked gently, "so that I can communicate with your friends." "My friends," she repeated vacantly. "I have no friends. He will not allow me to have any. He is so jealous. And tonight he turned me out into the snow and rain, although he knows how I dread the cold." "It was not snowing or raining tonight," I said, "but who is this he that treats you so cruelly?" "My husband, of course," she answered. "But don't let us talk of him. I hate him, and oh, I am so afraid of him. Whenever his eyes are upon me, I turn cold with dread, and when he attempts to kiss me, I all but faint. And then he says that I have a lover and that he will murder me. And I am so unhappy. How can I convey any idea of the inexpressible mournfulness of her tone, of the piteous look in her eyes? Hazardous as her conduct was, I felt convinced of her goodness and purity, for who could doubt it after once looking into the exquisite, innocent face? "Do not think of him," I said, "but rest here and get warm, and in the morning we'll talk matters over, and if you'll allow me, I will assist you in all my power." "How good you are to me," she murmured. "Yes, let us be happy tonight, for who knows where I shall be in the morning." I drew one of the easy chairs close to the fire for her, and I bade her to be seated. She nestled in its depths with a sigh of content. I had flung off my coat, and kneeling on the rug was endeavouring to rub some warmth into her small numbed hands. She bent forward to me and patted my face. "How handsome you are," she said, "and how nice you look in evening dress." I kissed her fingers passionately, but their dead coldness went to my heart with a chill. "I'm so cold," she again repeated. She stretched out her tiny feet, and as I saw the fine black silk stockings and the thin kid shoes with their dainty bows and diamond buckle, I mentally execrated the man who had turned a woman out of doors clothed like this on such a night. I took off her shoes and rubbed her feet and made her swallow some more brandy. I added coals to the fire and wrapped my coat round her bare shoulders. Every trivial event of that night is impressed on my memory and will only be effaced with death. Once I asked her if she would like me to wake up the servants and let them take her to bed, but she refused with a gentle smile. "Let me stay here," she entreated. "It is warm, and you know I am so cold." She walked up and down the room, and once drew aside the curtains and blind from the window and looked out into the garden. "I always hated that garden," she said. "Why?" cried I in astonishment. "Do you know it, then?" She smiled inscrutably and looked at me. She stretched out her arms, and I forgot everything. Forgot that she was married, that being under my roof she should have been sacred. I say I forgot everything, but before you condemn me, think of my temptation. I was only young. The blood of youth leaped through my veins. She held out her hands to me, and I rushed to her. I caught her in my arms, and I nearly crushed her slender form in the fervour of my embrace. I clasped her tightly to my throbbing, passionate heart, and rained hot kisses on her sweet face. I pressed my lips to hers and tried to thaw their icy chill by the warmth of mine. I murmured endearing words to her and swore that, come what might, she should never leave me. In those few blissful moments I felt the very ecstasy of love. My very soul went out of me. I was dizzy and blinded with emotion. I felt the supple form grow heavy in my arms, and she said faintly, "Let me rest." I lifted her into the chair, and I was alarmed to see how ill she looked. Her eyes were half closed, her whole figure dejected and helpless. "Forgive me, darling," I said remorsefully. "I forgot myself." She opened her eyes wearily. "I'm so cold," she said, "and so faint. Undo this band for the love of heaven, for I choke and die." She half rose with her hand to her throat and then sank nervelessly back into the easy chair. I bent over her and took the brooch from the band of black watered ribbon about her throat, and, great God, how can I write it? How can I steady my hand so as to pen the words? As I undid the ribbon, so did that lovely head drop off. Oh, the horror of it! There, where but one moment before was a beautiful breathing woman, was now a headless trunk, and at my feet was the head, hideous and bloody, the eyes open and glassy, and with an awful expression of terror in their depths, the teeth biting through the lips with a dumb agony. I looked round madly. Everywhere was blood. The rug was soaked in it. It fell from the easy chair to the ground with a hollow splash. A trail of it went to the door. The curtains where her hands had touched were stained scarlet. I looked down again at the head. I was frozen with horror. It was there. But oh, terrible sight. No longer the head of a young and beautiful woman, but a hideous skull, one mass of vile corruption. It was too much for me. I gave one yell of terror that rung through the quiet house, and just then my eye caught sight of the calendar. It was the 21st of December. I tried to move, but the smell of blood sickened me. With a moan, I fell to the ground, senseless. When again I recovered my senses, it was June. For 6 months I had been raving mad. On the morning of the 22nd of December, Anne had found me lying on the floor of the consulting room. The apartment looking precisely the same as usual, and for weeks and months I was insane. But thanks to clever doctors, good nursing, and a strong constitution, I pulled round. Directly I was strong enough, I went abroad to endeavour to efface the memory of that awful night. But although some of the terror has gone, I shall never forget it, and never shall I marry while the sight of that lovely face is still in my memory. I can give no explanation of the mysterious occurrence, excepting that some 6 months after I had returned to my professional duties from my illness, I attended an old lady who had known Dr. and Mrs. Caravini, who had once lived at number 19. I asked her what she was like, and the answer was, a very beautiful girl with an oval face and golden hair, and the most lovely violet eyes I ever saw. He was madly jealous of her, and, I believe, treated her very badly. I dare not ask anything more, but since then I have often wondered whether the doctor had murdered his fair young wife and buried her remains in the garden. This, however, is one of the mysteries that will never be revealed till the great day of judgment shall come, when the hidden secrets of all hearts shall be disclosed. Needless to say, I removed from the house without waiting for my 3 years' tenancy to expire, for I felt that another such night would kill me. As I drove past the other day, I saw that the to let card was still up at 19 Great Hanover Street.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret?
So that was 19 Great Hanover Street by Lillie Harris, and it was sponsored by Ed Winter. I should say that if you want to sponsor an episode, in which case you get to choose the story, go to my Ko-fi page, which I think is www.ko-fi/ it's either Tony Walker or one word. I think it is Tony Walker, but you'll find me on there anyway. And it's under commissions, and you can email me and from there, and we'll talk about it. They have to be the authors have to be dead, and has to be out of copyright, unless it's your story. Unless you can bring me copyright permissions, and it has to be, shorter than about 6,000 words or 6,000 words. So, we don't do one that's like 5 hours. Okay, enough of that. So, Ed Winter, thank you very much. I got the text of that story from the third Valancourt book of Christmas ghost stories. It's a great series, that. And you can get them. I got it off Kindle. I think it was about £4. Maybe £6 for the third one. I bought the first one as well. That was about £4. £1 is £1, I should say. I'm being very vulgar. So she's very interesting, because when you look, it's like it said, nothing much is known about her. And on the fiction database, nobody knows anything about her, not her dates or anything. But then when you do a bit of a search, you see that there was an article called Slumming in Whitechapel. And some researchers from the University of Ghent in Belgium went through a whole load of newspaper archives, and they dug around for this woman, and they found her details. They found an article about her being like an author interview from Home and Hearth from the 1880s. And she's an absolutely fascinating person. So let me tell you a little bit about her. No, I'm first going to say, I'm going to tell you something about her, what my reactions to this story. So remember, I'm reading this story, and I, at that point, hadn't done my researches, and I didn't know much about the author. And the first thing I thought, this woman knows how to write. She writes in a very direct journalistic style. And what I mean is, some literary styles are quite hard to narrate. I mean, they may be great authors, but for me, actually reading the words out there, I stumble over them. They have long sentences with clauses in the middle. And and you get to the point in the end, a bit like me, and you've forgotten what the first one was, and that's important because you've got to think about the emphasis. So they may say something like Henry James or William Faulkner because they were very clever. They would start like this, and Joan entered the haunted house, and then they give you a clause, and it's full of whoa, this is terrible, full of foreboding, and then they say. And then they say something about his cravat and that his uncle Silas used to be a sailor. And you have millions of clauses. And you've got to say those in a different tone of voice. And then you come to the end, which is about entering the haunted house. And it's like, and saw a shadow on the wall. By which time you've forgotten the mood that you began with. And so that's a narrator's problem, I think. But she's not like that. Lillie Harris. Those sentences were easy to say. She was writing direct prose, very clear prose. I thought, good, this woman knows how to write. And when you look how the story's structured, with the foreshadowing, and I'll say something about that, but and the ending, it's beautifully written. So the first thing, we know nothing about this woman except this is a professional writer. This is not somebody who's just sat down and written this for the crack, Then she knows how to write. And then I thought, as we go on, I thought she's titillating the audience, She's pandering to the haunted house story craze. And then a bit later we have this sensual, and then we have the lurid nature of the blood. That was popular, don't kid yourself, it still is. That's why people read true crime and crime novels. We have a morbid fascination with murder. So it's a murder story, sort of, all that blood. It isn't a murder story. Well, it is a murder story, but, it's framed as a ghost story, which is a ghost story. But it's not a straight murder story. That's my point, laboriously made. And then we get this kind of very titillating bit where there's this, she's a bit of a looker. Call blimey, and the poor lad, his pulse races. And and then we have her. She takes her jacket off, and she's got this low-cut bodice, and she has this perfect bosom, and he's like a bit hot and bothered about it. Really, overcomes this. Of course, in modern times, this would be problematic. I saw this is an aside. This is a Tony Walker aside. There's a barrister. I'm not. Yeah, you've got to put your caveats in. In no way am I not acknowledging violence to women. Usually by men they know, rather than complete strangers. That's just a fact. Mostly, if they're going to be harmed, it will be somebody they know. And she's pressing for specific consent. I think at this point, verbal consent, before any kind of advance or sexual contact is made, there must be a very clear process of consent. And I thought, she's a barrister, she's your lawyer. Lawyers love forms. So the next thing I thought would be, there would be a form that you would bring, and maybe there'd be degrees of intimacy that you would have. And I think you would probably have to consent to each one, a kiss, caress, the rest. And these would perhaps require more definite standards or more explicit and rigorous standards, to the extent you may need them witnessed. So it may be that you have to have somebody in the next room who mustn't be a member of your family, probably don't want a member of your family in the next room anyway. And you'd have to get them to, witness the consent form. I know that's a bit of an example of my sense of humour, but that's the way it's going. He would have been in a lot of trouble for this. Don't be offended. It's not worth being offended about things I say. Just ignore them. Right. Because who am I? Anyway. So, yeah, it was racy, and he shouldn't have done it. There we are. Let me tell you something about Lillie Harris. Well, he didn't do anything. Because to be fair to him, when she said no, he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot myself." And she did thrust herself at him. Okay, I'm not making, I don't think he's a criminal in this case, honestly. Anyway, modern times have made things so hard to say without, treading on toes. But don't have your toes tread on. Anyway, so let me tell you about her because she's really interesting. She was born in 1863. So Elizabeth Rebecca Sarah Harris, familiarly, hard to say, known as Lillie, was born on October 19th. I even know the day, 1863, near Ventnor, a fashionable seaside resort on the Isle of Wight, just off the south coast of England. She was the only child of Jewish parents, Samuel Harris, a carver and gilder, and Caroline Harris, née Goldschmidt. Harris began writing at a young age, partly due to her natural talent and partly to assist her father, whose income had diminished. At the age of 13, prodigy she was, she published her first book, Mama's Fairy Tales, in 1878. And by the 1881 census, this is all research from these wonderful Dutch researchers, Belgian. Oh, that's another one, isn't it? Don't mix the Dutch and the Belgians up. She was already listing her occupation as authoress in 1881. Yeah, she contributed to the children's magazine Little Folks, and then moved to the north of England. Sensible move. To Newcastle first of all. I think for work. I think she was a working journalist. This is the 1880s, so things are changing. You had working female journalists in the 1880s. So she started writing columns and short stories for the Newcastle Weekly Chronicle, including a series of satirical social sketches titled Our Young Ladies, 1886. She built a reputation as a public speaker, giving lectures on diverse topics such as animal treatment and women's future. Isn't that great? What a woman. So by the late 1880s, she's working not in Newcastle, but in Sheffield. She's writing for Sheffield papers. And the story goes, as far as I can glean it, the Sheffield Weekly Telegraph published a series called Slumming in Whitechapel in 1888. So this is around the time of the Jack the Ripper murders. And she wrote a series which sold out, was massively popular in the Weekly Telegraph, and they made her lady editor. I'm not going to comment on editors versus lady editors, but you can think about it. She managed various columns and founded the Kind Hearted Brigade, a children's society. Then in 1891, her husband, John Charles Cousins Williams, died in a railway accident when she was 6 months pregnant. So she subsequently faced financial difficulties and appeared in a bankruptcy court. By 1896, she had moved to London and briefly became editor of Woman's Life magazine. In 1897, she moved to South Africa with her son to join William Eugene Chapman, her soon-to-be second husband. He was a former editor and society figure in London, and he'd emigrated to Kimberley in South Africa to manage a diamond mine. She must come back to, this is in the 1890s, so 21 years later, at a relatively young age of 57 in 1921. She died at the Wandsworth and Clapham Union Infirmary in London. Cause was cerebral embolism and cardiovascular disease. Her death in the infirmary suggested she faced financial or health difficulties in the final years. Her later life remains largely undocumented, but she did make an appeal to the Royal Literary Fund for financial support, which wasn't granted. I'm a big believer in deliberate practice. That is to say, practice your skills. If you want to be good at golf, play golf. If you want to write, if you want to be a writer, write. If you want to be a good motorist, drive. It's obvious, isn't it? If you want to be a painter, paint and learn how to do it. So I think it's worthwhile if there are people out there who are interested in writing ghost stories, which I think is having a bit of a resurgence as an art form at the moment. So let's think about the literary technique. So it's a first-person narrative. It's not a frame story. It's not when, this happened to a friend of mine. It's a straight-on narrative told to us by Dr. Alan Forsyth, who's a doctor, as you know. First person brings you right there. You're right there, seeing it through the person's eyes, which is direct and is a powerful technique. In a longer work, it can cause problems in that you might want to show things from other people's points of view, or it'll be a little bit distanced, and that is difficult. Although people like, lots of people. I just read Peter James, King of Crime Story, and he uses multiple first persons. I like to say that one of my books, Unreal City, I did the same thing. It avoids head hopping. You don't if you're writing from a person's point of view, it's wrong. It's considered very bad form to then jump to somebody else's thoughts. You don't have access to their thoughts. Okay, in first person, it's through the one. I've said this, through the person's eyes. So the opening of the story introduces the character and sets up the premise. This is a man he ends up at a haunted house, and he's a skeptical, rational person. Of course he is. That's setting him up for the fall. I mean, there may be a story where the skeptical, rational person is proved right and there are no ghosts, but I'm not sure that's very interesting. Or there may be a reverse whereby, I think there probably are, if somebody can remember them, whereby a very superstitious person who believes in ghosts is converted to materialist physicalism and no longer believes in them. I'm not sure that's a very interesting story either. Anyway, so there's a good background about the house, and there's one of the things about ghost stories is, and everybody says you should do it, you build the tension slowly. So at first, he poo-poos the warnings, which are foreshadowing. You, the listener, the reader, now know, oh, you foolish man. But he doesn't. And so his hubris, he's going to have a fall, isn't he? We see him set up for the fall. We know it. He ignores these, and he's like, oh, it's a lovely house. All my friends came round in the summer, and it was absolutely beautiful. And it's been lovely. It's been papered, and it sounds a very nice house, actually. I'd like to live there, apart from going mad every Christmas. Although, sometimes Christmas is enough to send you mad. But there we are. So, yeah, this is the rising action, and then we have the climax. It's already been foreshadowed. It's December the 22nd. This is going to happen. He knows this. The first thing, oh yeah, Nip the dog. I didn't know the dog was going to die. This has immediately got a whole bunch of unsubscriptions and comments about, I stopped there. I cannot bear it. Nip, I'm sure he's a wonderful dog. But there have been lots and lots of dogs who've died since 1888, billions of them, especially ones you didn't know. There's a dog in Ulaanbaatar in 1922 who died. So don't be upset about it. The difference about that dog in Ulaanbaatar, I've just made that one up, but there will have been, let's say, there was no Nip. Don't be upset. It's fictional. It's like if you read, if you go to the, I'm watching Rings of Power, and all those orcs get killed, and you don't feel sorry for them, so because they're not real. Anyway, but my heart sank when Nip died. I thought, oh, flipping heck, here we go. And then we have the blood. Now, this is really interesting because we know that she covered the Jack the Ripper murders, don't we? And so I didn't know that when I read it, first of all, but in hindsight, you're like, oh, the blood, that's a Ripper murder, isn't it? That is a murder. That's true crime. She's a journalist who's covered true crime. This is a true crime thing. And there we have it. Yeah. And I also thought, I want to say about one thing that did cross my mind. Nipsey's, I'm going back to the dog. Nipsey's his faithful companion. Nip dies. He goes out with his mates. He's talking about how lovely the weather is. He has a great night out, and he's forgotten all about Nip. If it had been my dog, I wouldn't be going out to dinner. I'd be heartbroken. Anyway, so it's all set up, and then outside the door, and it's foreshadowed because we're told about the wife disappears, set up, and then the husband dies a year later, exactly a year later. She's come to get him and send him mad and die and give him a heart attack or something. I don't know how they died. Probably something cardiovascular. The shock kills him probably. So this is the charming young woman who is dead, who's a ghost, whose head drops off. That'd be enough, wouldn't it? That would that would kind of. I don't say when I was a younger man and I was dating, and say I'd gone back and we're having a coffee as you did in those days. I don't know what to do now, and we didn't have our consent forms in those days, but and then suddenly she says, "Oh, I'm choking. Take this band off my neck." Have I ever been out with a girl wearing a choker? I think I might have. But I take it off, her head falls off. It's going to be a shock. And it was a shock to him. 6 months insane. But lucky he didn't die because of his strong constitution. But all of that, I've gone over her titillating this, haven't I? This is a journalist. I'm going to say this again at the end probably. She is writing something to sell. She is like a crime writer or somebody popular today, a successful author. They're selling to the market. The market wants gothic. The market wants, and is very gothic, the market wants true crime. The market wants a bit of grotesquerie, the head falling off. People like it. They do. You might not. I might not, but people like it, believe me. And it wants a bit of sauciness. Ooh, low-cut bodice. Ooh, isn't she pretty? Violet eyes. Breathy kisses. I think that would be difficult, a breathy kiss, wouldn't it? Anyway, let's just stop there, okay? But you know, she's a journalist. This is what she's doing. She's selling. She's written something to sell this, and from an early age, because of her dad's business going down the pan, she had to write things to sell. So she did. I do, of course, my classic stories. I'm doing a lot of literature, and I'm not sure what they write for. They write out of the soul, I suppose, but it isn't. But this is a commercial piece. I think it's good. I think I really enjoyed it. So remember, she was an investigative journalist working on true crime. She did a whole bunch of things, of course. Now let's look at the context. We have the Gothic genre evolving through the 19th century. This comes out in 1888, is it? And 1889, 1888, round about then. And we have Varney the Vampire Feast of Blood. Now listen, I've done an excerpt from that. You can find it on the channel. That came up, that was serialised between 1845 to 1847. It is not as well written as this, but otherwise pretty similar. You know, heaving bosoms, Gothic babes, blood, violence, titillation. It's Varney the Vampire. This is this kind of thing. That's set the scene. She knows there's a market for it. Then we have Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, published in 1872. It's exploration. This is a polite way of saying it. It's exploration of female sexuality and desire. So these two girls have lesbian overtones. Titillation, you know. Honestly, I once watched a movie with James Corden. It wasn't a good movie, really, called Lesbian Vampire Killers. But it was very much like that. It was titillation, you know. I didn't watch it for that. I watched it for serious research into the Gothic literature and media. So that's 1872. So listen, Lillie Harris knows this stuff sells. The Curse on Mitre Square is an interesting story by John Francis Brewer, was published in 1888. Written just weeks after the murder of Catherine Eddowes by Jack the Ripper, it blended Gothic conventions with contemporary horrors. The work portrayed Whitechapel as a cursed and haunted space, likely influencing later depictions of the area. If you've ever read Alan Moore's From Hell comic book, and then there was a movie made of it with Johnny Depp, it uses a lot of Ian Sinclair's stuff about Hawksmoor and the occult psychogeography of London. So, you know, that's why I thought this... I haven't read The Curse upon Mitre Square by John Francis Brewer, but I'm going to do it. In fact, I'm just going to copy that. Excuse me while I do this. That's 1888. So it's obviously somebody in very bad taste, profiting on, very quickly on the murder. But listen, that's going to happen. If we have a serial killer that gets sent away and becomes public, there's going to be a whole bunch of books out about him, and people will buy them by the millions, honestly. So whose fault is it, the writer or the consumer? I'm not making a judgment, at least not out loud. So Slumming in Whitechapel was published between October the 27th and November 17th, 1888, just after the first Ripper murders. That's Lillie Harris did that, and it went out in the Sheffield Weekly. So she was a female journalist, and she drew on the tales of sensation, a genre that blended elements of Gothic horror and realistic settings and contemporary issues. So this work, 19 Great Hanover Street, published 1889, after her journalistic experience and using her knowledge as a very bright woman and a good writer of the Gothic tradition. And she's a commercial writer, and she's used to appealing to her audience interests. And just to bracket it, Dracula comes out in 1897, so 11 years later. And this has these themes of sexuality and desire in the vampire mythos, Victorian sexual repression. Is it sexual repression? I think it's right plain. I don't think anybody's repressing anything. So it's evident in its treatment of female characters. I mean, the doctor's wife, Mrs. Carvini, is it? I thought, this is a vampire. She's described just as a vampire woman in Carmilla or somebody, or in one of the Brides of Dracula later would have been, So it's a work that bridges journalism and fiction, or at least takes influence from both her careers. So, and when we were doing the research, you find that they're saying, oh, this is about how literature explores. Nonsense. It's not exploring for academic enlightenment. These works were not so much challenging societal norms as exploiting them for profit. The public's appetite for stories of sex and violence, particularly those involving female victims or fallen women, was insatiable. Authors and publishers were more than willing to cater to this demand, and often under the pretense of moral or social commentary. At least she doesn't do that. At least she doesn't dress it up like a lot of these. I'm talking about the serial killer books that come out these days, and they're dressed up as social commentary. And I'm not naming any authors, and I'm not dissing them. It's not a genre I read particularly, but like the Yorkshire Ripper. Yeah, we're talking about the societal, but really it's just serving up this kind of material to a public that has an insatiable appetite for it. That's it. But she herself, I have absolute tons of respect for this woman. I didn't know about her till today, and so thanks for Ed Winter for pointing me in her direction and asking me to read this. I really liked it. And now, interestingly, I'm toying with the thumbnail. I've got two versions. One is a haunted house, because people click on haunted houses, and another is a picture of an attractive woman. So you may say, oh, yeah, let's look at me. Let's be reflexive about it. Why am I doing this? Am I doing it to comment on society, to make pious and, let's not go any further, virtue signalling commentaries? I'm trying to read you stories that you enjoy, that I will profit from. That's it. So I'm no different from Lillie Harris, and I have no claim to be. I don't claim to be either. Anyway, after that, I hope you're all well. I've got to take the dogs out. Callie's just been up. She's been very good, but about this time, they all start coming and bugging me and jumping on me and stuff because they know it's walkie time. And then I've got to write a story about a haunted house because I've got a live engagement on Halloween. I'm doing some live stories and I need to do some more material. I dreamt this story about a haunted house, so keep an eye on the channel. I'll put it out on the channel because my actual physical publications in paper, they are problematic at the moment. If there's a publisher out there who wants to publish me, just get in touch and we'll come to an agreement. All right. Bye anyway.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so? Isn't that so?